A light spring drizzle hangs over a drainage ditch outside Spencerville, Indiana, when a jogger sees something pale in the weeds. It is the morning of April 4th, 1988. Expecting a discarded bag, he steps closer and realizes it is a small, motionless body lying in the ditch. He runs for help. Allen County deputies arrive and tape off the scene. In the shallow water is an 8-year-old girl, partially dressed, socks caked with mud, hair tangled with grass. One shoe is missing. A few yards away, investigators mark a plastic shopping bag containing a sex toy and begin photographing every angle. The girl is identified as April Marie Tinsley of Fort Wayne. 2 days earlier, on Good Friday, she had been a third grader walking between friends' houses in her southeast neighborhood. The sky was gray, but kids still played outside, cutting across lawns and sidewalks they knew by heart. April and 2 friends walked from one house to another, talking about school and Easter weekend. At some point, April realized she had left her umbrella behind. She told the other girls she was going back to get it and started down the block alone. The distance was only a short stretch of sidewalk, but she never reached the house and never came back. When April's mother noticed she was missing, the familiar street turned into a search grid. Neighbors checked yards and alleys, calling her name. Officers knocked on doors, asking who had seen a little girl in a blue jacket, who had noticed a blue pickup some residents reported in the area. Local television stations aired April's school photo, a slight girl with straight brown hair and a shy smile. For 3 days, volunteers combed fields and ditches around Fort Wayne. They walked through tall grass. The discovery near Spencerville ended the search and confirmed the worst fear. An autopsy showed that April had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Examiners believed she had been kept alive for a time before she was killed, then left in the ditch about 10 miles from her home. Semen recovered from her body was carefully preserved. In 1988, DNA testing was in its early stages, but detectives understood they were holding evidence that might one day identify a killer. Fort Wayne reacted with grief and anger. Parents kept their children indoors. School counselors met with classmates facing an empty desk. 2 radio stations raised money for a reward. Neighbors formed a group called April to support missing child cases and keep attention on the investigation. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people, including known sex offenders and men who owned blue pickups. For a time, they focused on a suspect charged in another child molestation case, but he was acquitted, and there was no proof tying him to April. Years passed, and the investigation lost momentum, but never closed. April's photo stayed pinned to bulletin boards in squad rooms. In 1990, a message appeared on the side of a barn not far from where April's body had been found. Written in crude handwriting, it claimed responsibility for killing an 8-year-old named April and promised to kill again. Crayons were discovered nearby. Detectives treated the graffiti as a potential confession and tried to learn who could have written it. They could not rule out a hoax, but the words matched details from the case and reinforced the fear that the killer still felt close enough to taunt the community. For another 14 years, nothing broke. Families moved, detectives retired, and children who had once been warned not to walk alone became parents themselves. Then, over Memorial Day weekend in 2004, a series of plastic bags appeared at homes in Fort Wayne. 3 were left on young girls' bicycles, and 1 in a mailbox. Each bag contained a handwritten note, a used condom, and Polaroid photographs of a man's lower body. In the notes, the writer claimed to have abducted, raped, and killed April Tinsley and threatened to take another child if the letters were not reported to police. This time, science was on the investigators' side. Testing showed that the DNA from the condoms matched the DNA recovered from April's body in 1988, but even with that match, the suspect's name remained unknown. In the years that followed, investigators refused to box up the file for good. In 2015, with help from a private lab, they released composite images of a man generated from the DNA profile, predicting eye color and facial structure. Tips surged and fell away. April's family appeared at press conferences, reminding the public that this was not just an old headline, but a child whose killer was still unidentified. The turning point came in 2018, when detectives turned to genetic genealogy. A Fort Wayne detective sent the unknown killer's DNA profile to a company that specialized in building family trees from crime scene DNA. Analysts uploaded the profile to an open database used by people searching for relatives. Instead of a direct hit, they looked for partial matches, distant cousins who shared segments of DNA. From those threads, a genealogist built out generations of a family and then worked forward, narrowing the list to living men who fit the age and location of the suspect. The work pointed to two brothers with ties to Northeast Indiana. One of them, 59-year-old John D. Miller of Grabille, lived in a small mobile home community outside Fort Wayne. Police began quiet surveillance. When Miller set out his trash, they retrieved used condoms from his garbage and sent them to the lab. The profile that came back matched the markers they had been staring at since 1988. The DNA on the condoms, the DNA on the notes, and the DNA recovered from April's body all came from the same man. On July 15, 2018, detectives approached Miller outside his home and asked him to come to the police station. In an interview room, after being advised of his rights, he was asked if he knew why he was there. According to the affidavit, Miller replied, "April Tinsley." When investigators asked what he had done to her, he admitted that he had abducted April from the street in Fort Wayne, taken her to his trailer, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her. He said he then drove her body to the ditch near Spencerville and left her there. The confession closed the circle that had remained open for 30 years. While April's classmates grew up, Miller had been living a quiet life on the edge of the community he had terrorized, working, paying bills, and carrying the secret of what he had done. The barn message and the notes from 2004 were his own attempts to boast and relive the crime. The DNA that could not name him in 1988 had finally caught up with him. In December 2018, John Miller stood in an Allen County courtroom and changed his plea to guilty on charges of murder and child molestation. The judge sentenced him to 80 years in prison, 50 years for murder, and 30 for the sexual assault. For April's family, it was not closure in any simple sense. Nothing could give back the 8-year-old who had gone to fetch an umbrella on a gray afternoon and never come home. But the question that had hung over their lives for 3 decades, who took her and why, finally had a name and a face. Today, people in Fort Wayne still visit April's grave. They leave stuffed animals, balloons, and flowers at the stone that bears the dates 1980 to 1988. Her case is now used in trainings as an example of how preserved evidence and new technology can converge years later to expose a hidden offender. For families who raise children in the shadow of an unsolved murder, there is some reassurance in knowing that the man who haunted their community will never walk free again. The story that began with a child disappearing between 2 houses in Fort Wayne ended in an interview room 30 years later, when a man finally spoke her name. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.